Hey everyone, welcome to another episode. Today, Holly and I are going to be diving into what it takes to transition the company, specifically the internal mechanisms that should be in place or that you should start thinking about in order to have that successful transition. And I think a key management team is one of those important things that we'll go through today. So Holly, we'll go through kind of the general idea of that, what some of the challenges are, and then we'll come up with some solutions for people. So why don't you take a stab at just giving us a little overview of the way you would describe this issue?
Most commonly, we are working with founders of businesses or sometimes second generation, but a lot of times it's people that started their business and they grew it to a point where maybe they were ready to start thinking about their next phase of life. And so then they're starting to think about, how does my business run without me? And really, if we could give them advice earlier on, we would say that that is something to be considered sooner rather than later. Because even when a company is younger, it's good to be thinking about having the end in mind and building the business toward that end. But it's shifting gears from the company is all about me and it's all about my leadership and what I have built, and getting it to a place where the company can run without me and it can keep going.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listening will probably agree that, or they may be at the place now where they're like, okay, I get the reason why it's important to be replaceable. Cause at first, the business centers around us, the owner, but then then it grows into something else. Right. And people may be resistant to letting go of that control because it's kind of like your baby and you've built it. But let's say somebody is at the place where they're like, okay, I get it intellectually that I need to start outsourcing these functions. I need to take less control. I need to be replaceable within the business. I think easier said than done. So like, what are some of the steps somebody can take to start moving that direction?
I've seen some really different things on the spectrum of this topic. I've seen companies that truly are highly service oriented and the customer relationship is very strongly attached to the business owner. And those are hard, not impossible, but they can be very difficult, whether it's a PR firm or a marketing firm or a design firm, different things like that. But sometimes it's really within the mindset of the owner. And so I think the first thing is to just make the decision that I want to find a way to be less important to the company, to replicate myself, to build a standard operating procedure that other people can follow, that I can mentor people into. And so really that's the first thing, is just making up your mind that that's what you want, because at that point, then you can start to build it. Really, until you have that mindset shift, you may be thinking, I enjoy these different parts of running the company. I don't want to let it go. And so it's pretty near impossible to let go of something unless you really have that mindset.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it makes me think of like, what are the kind of core functions that happen in a business? Certainly in the trade space, you'll have, if you're the owner, you probably are pretty good at the sales and business development because you wouldn't have got to where you are unless you figured out a way to find business, right? So the owner's probably pretty savvy and a pretty good salesperson, or knows how to find the work out there and bring it in. And then they also have to know, okay, once we get the business in the door, now we have to know how operationally, how do we make it happen? And the owner probably figured that out as well. So of these functions, like what should I let go of first? Like what should I do here? Like how do I think about maybe slowly getting rid of one of those two things?
Yeah, so sometimes it's figuring out where your strengths are. And thus, we figured out that my strength is more business development side. Your strength is more on the operational side. And so we have a very natural complement to each other. And a lot of times business owners have a key person like that already in place that, just naturally they came together. And so it's figuring out what those strengths are. I think another thing they can look at is what's what's the lowest hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is, what's the thing they least enjoy?
Yeah.
Talking to this one owner, and he said, I asked him that, I said, you're managing the finances, you're doing the business development, you're acting as the overall operations director, you're doing HR, you're doing marketing. We brought in a fractional consultant and they ended up picking up the HR piece of it, at least to do some projects and help them, do an employee manual, procedures manual, some different things that they were maybe out of compliance on. But maybe the next step after that will be actually having somebody help them manage more of the day to day in that area. So they see, oh, I freed this up. What's the next thing that I'd love to let go of?
Yeah, it's like once they get like a taste of it, right? They're like, yeah, how do I get more of that? Right? This is they feel that release of their time and effort.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great.
And so, and sometimes we come in where we talk to an owner and they've already done all of this. They've got a great team in place.
Hmm.
And I can think of a couple of examples of clients we work with was somebody that several years ago, they started going to a business group that really helped them. Yeah, I need to be less valuable to my business and I need to be able to take a 2-month vacation and let the business run without me and have that as a test to see if it can really run smoothly. So he gradually empowered some people that were already in his company that were he saw they were ownership mindset and driven, and he empowered these managers to become leaders in the business, and to the point that where now he's in a sales transaction where he can walk away from the business comfortably and he knows that the company's in good hands with these two key leaders that he has mentored and empowered over the last several years. And then on the flip side, we've talked to companies where they've got good supervisors and people that are managing different functions within the business, but the owner is still the operator. They're still the one that is pulling everyone together. They're resolving conflicts among the managers and, they're still the central point.
Like they still the president, chief executive officer function where they're
Yes.
keeping it. Yeah.
And, and so, they're in a good place because they have delegated a lot of things. But at the same time, the next step is a big leap. It's, if they were to sell the company or step away or retire, how are these people all going to get along? How are they going to make decisions? Who's going to the break the ties of, where there's dissension? You still need somebody or, a couple of people that play that role. And it's figuring out, is there someone in that team that could be groomed to that? Or is it some talent that needs to be recruited to the organization?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, okay. No, that's great. But let's talk about maybe, let's say we've got the management in place and our mind is going to, okay, transitioning out of the company. But then we look down the hall and we see all the people that have helped us build this company over the years. And, we're thinking about what it looks like to leave. But now we're thinking, well, what happens to these people? Right? When I leave, if I sell it to an outside party or whatever your options are, what happens to these people when I'm gone? I think is something that definitely crosses the mind of the owner. And so how do you think about that? And how do you plan around that contingency? Yeah.
Yeah, I think different owners are, they lean more one way or the other on this. I think some owners that are like, hey, this is my business, not too worried about what happens to them after the dust settles, if I decide to retire or sell the company. And then there's other people that, like you said, they feel like these people got me here. I want to honor that. I want to reward them. And so, a very common thing nowadays is people are getting calls from private equity firms that are canvassing and trying to find potential founders that would like to sell their business. And so, the tendency is they might engage in those conversations without really thinking about how's this, if I do this, what is it going to do to the culture and what's it going to do with the people that I just described, that have gotten me to where I am. And I've seen some owners that started down that path. And then once they start putting a pencil to paper and they realize, a certain amount of this budget is going to get cut, um, to make the private equity firm happy, or maybe it's a strategic buyer where they already have some of this talent in place and some of these people aren't needed anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. When you say strategic buyer, could you elaborate on what you mean for those that may not know what that means? Yeah.
Yeah, so a strategic buyer would be maybe it could be an industry competitor or, a bigger company doing the same thing that you do where they want to expand into a different geographic area, or they want to add an area of service that they don't currently offer that would be complementary to their existing business. So they're buying your company for some strategic reason. They're not just buying it as an investment that they're going to build and then maybe add to their portfolio and eventually sell. Strategic buyers really doing it to build their business in a meaningful way. And then there's what I have been aware of for many years is also the idea of selling to an ESOP, which is an employee stock owned plan. And the other option is selling to managers within the business or family members that are in the business. And so those two could potentially honor those relationships more, but there could be challenges there as well. Do you have the right talent in place to run the company already, or would a strategic buyer be more of a fit because that's going to bring in talent that will help fill in some of the holes?
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, do you see people preferring to go strategic buyer versus the private equity route? Do you see any preferences in turn, among owners in general? I'm sure the people listening that maybe haven't gone down this path are kind of curious. Like, what do people usually do? Like that there's a lot of different ways to go.
I think sometimes they start off with the idea of maybe selling to someone internally, and
Okay.
then they might realize that there's some deficits there, or they realize the management team doesn't have the finances
Yeah.
to raise the capital that they need to really buy them. And then there's also risk factor. Let's say, for example, they sell to the management team and they don't get all their cash up front and they're getting it in terms of a note over some period of time, then they're leaving money in the company. And, if the management team doesn't adequately do a good job running the business afterward, is the owner going to get all their money back? So I think sometimes people will go private equity or strategic buyer because it's more money up front and it may feel less risky. But then you have that trade off of potential cultural differences and, just a feeling of remorse over, what happens to the management team, that you're leaving behind.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then, so when we're thinking about like, what are the risks of doing something like an ESOP, the stock ownership plan to the owner, if they were to do something like that? Now, because I think the motivation there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the motivation to doing something like that would be to give the employees some kind of reward or ability to participate in this sale that's going to happen. So, but what are our risks there?
Yeah, so ESOPs are interesting because they allow the owner to either partially or fully sell their shares and take some money off the table, or all their money off the table, and use it as a, complete retirement mechanism. And banks usually get involved and loan money to facilitate that buyout. So it's not all having to be purchased at once with cash
So the bank is loaning money to the company
to buy.
or to the employees, right, to that plan in order for the owner to then cash in his chips or her chips, right? Okay, got it. Yeah.
And so what happens is this new entity is set up that's the ESOP, and that new entity buys the owner out, and then gradually the ESOP grants a little piece of the company to the employees, like a profit sharing plan. Just like, if you're a participant in a profit sharing plan through a company, you get money contributed to that for you every year that builds up as part of your retirement. And all that money goes in before tax. The only difference is the ESOP is building shares of the company. So it'd be kind of like if you, let's say you worked for ExxonMobil and you were getting some shares of ExxonMobil every year as part of your profit sharing, except it's a smaller private business. And so every year the ESOP has to go out and get a valuation, formal valuation done so you know how much you're building in your account.
Okay.
But the positive of that is that the key people are going to get more of the business over time because how much you receive in shares is really a function of your compensation. So if you are earning more, you're going to gradually build up more shares of the business. And so it is an opportunity for those key people to get some reward over time for what they're contributing. And then it allows the owner to either get out of the business and retire or cash some of their chips in.
Okay. All right. So if you were to summarize, like we will wrap up here in a second, but if you were to summarize, okay, in a couple sentences, why would I do venture capital? And then why would I do a strategic buyer? And why would I do a sale to the management team? And then why would I do an ESOP? So kind of 4 options on the table here. If you were to summarize that really quickly, what if I'm an owner and I'm looking at all these options, like what's my argument for each one of these brief couple sentences?
Yeah, so private equity is good when somebody wants more immediate money off the table.
Okay. Does that typically maximize? Is that going to typically maximize your sales price there, or does that depend?
Usually,
Okay. Okay.
it's more money up front. It's usually a little less complicated. Downside being that it could change the culture of the business and, you know, the company may get leaned down afterward. Strategic buyer is good if you want a little bit more of the characteristic of that upfront money, but you can really look at the culture of the business that's buying you and see if those two cultures are a fit for each other with the idea that you're hoping to perpetuate that.
You have some desire to keep the company as is or follow a certain path moving forward versus you may be giving up a lot of that with a private equity sale. Okay. Got it. All right.
Right. You thought might be a good fit if you have a really strong management team in effect and you don't need to recruit a lot of new people to run the business after you're gone. And if you have the tolerance for going through some complexity to get through the process and maybe delay part of your cash from the sale, because usually you get part of it up front and then part of it is paid out over 5 to 10 year period afterward. And then sell to management team or family members really makes the most sense if there's some ability for them to raise the capital, where they have the means to go get SBA loans or they've got some other kind of capital mechanism where they could bring some money to the table. And that's where, you're really going to retain the culture, but also when you have a strong management team and operational plan in place, you can feel pretty comfortable there. You just got to weigh the risk of that. And, if it's really kind of like a for sale by a seller's note where there's not going to be as much up front out of the sale and then just weighing how the company will do with that management team after you're gone.
Awesome. All right. Well, we started off talking about building a management team, and then we ended up going through all the different ways you could sell. So I think that's a rich episode. Anything else you want to say before we wrap?
No, I just think this is one of the areas that I think for a lot of business owners is a little bit more nebulous and because it just feels a little less tangible and there's just a lot of moving parts to it. But I do think there's a lot of good resources available for people. And we try to recommend books and consultants and different processes that they can go through to help them figure out where they are and, help them go through a discernment to see what do they need to do next with their management team and what does that look like from a succession standpoint.
Awesome. Very good. All right. Well, it was a good conversation today. We'll see everybody next time. Have a good one.